The room was too bright. Afternoon sun spilled through the uneven windows, bouncing harshly off the crumbling white plaster walls. My hands were trembling, but I held the bow anyway, fingers clammy, the violin pressed to my jaw. I focused on the notes in front of me, black dots trembling in the stifling air as I read them, determined not to look up, determined not to falter. It was Schubert's Fantasy, technically demanding, delicate, the sort of thing you either land on your feet or fall flat on your face. Every Wednesday, the crit, as the professors called it, filled the main studio with folding chairs, music stands, and a row of unsmiling faces at the far end. This was supposed to be feedback. But now that Maestro Rodriguez had retired, Don Ignacio led the sessions, and they felt more like trial by fire. From the corner of my eye, I could see Mariana snickering, elbowing Raoul beside her. Even the professors looked tired, impatient. When I finished the first movement, I heard the little coughs, the shifting in chairs. I stiffened my shoulders, waiting. Don Ignacio stood, hands clasped behind his back. Again, he said, his voice heavy with annoyance, from the cadenza. He didn't look at me, he looked through me. I started again, the sudden hush making my heart thunder, but my left pinky locked up halfway through, refusing to reach for the high note. The sound that escaped the violin was thin, desperate. I faltered. Mariana snorted. Raoul chuckled under his breath, an ugly, cutting sound. Professor Alvarez didn't bother to hide his eye roll. Ignacio raised a hand to stop me. The silence pressed in hard like weight on my lungs. My God, Lucia, are you sure this is for you? His tone was contempt, not concern. That passage is basic. Even first years play it better than this. The laughter in the room was muffled but unmistakable. Little coughs hiding smirks, I felt my face burn. I'm sorry, I muttered. My knuckles were white, I gripped the violin too tightly. He sighed. Sorry won't get you into the conservatory. Sorry won't feed you if you intend to keep playing for pennies at weddings. He barked out a laugh. The others joined in, a cold, ugly chorus. Sometimes we must know when to let go of childish dreams. Someone in the back whispered, should have learned to play guitar if you want to make it in Mexico, and the giggles strung more than the words. They gave me no more feedback, simply moved on. As I packed up trying to disappear into myself, Don Ignacio's final shot caught me. You're chasing fantasies, Lucia. Go home before you embarrass yourself further. The walk home wound through cobbled streets, lined with crumbling stucco walls painted in faded colors, turquoise, sun-bleached orange, dusty yellow. The air stank faintly of car exhaust, roasting corn and smog, but occasionally a fat purple jacaranda bloom fell onto the sidewalk, and I stepped over it gently, still desperate not to break anything fragile. My apartment was one room above my tier's bakery. She heard the door and peeked out, white hair poking from her scarf. Hola, Mija, she called, dusted in flour, cheeks smudged with cocoa. I tried to keep my voice light. Hola, tia. How was your rehearsal? I lied, it was fine, I have a lot to practice. I slipped by before the tightness in my throat could betray me. At dinner, all the family was gathered, cousins, my parents, my uncles. The noisy kitchen, full of salsa, fried plantain, chilies roasting, was comfort and chaos. But as soon as my uncle saw the violin propped by the door, his mouth twisted. You're still at that, Lucia, he crowed over the hum of conversation. When will you get serious? His wife made a face as if she'd smelled something off. There are hundreds of musicians in Mexico City. And you want to play violins? My father set down his fork, pushing food around his plate. She'll see sense soon. I looked at my sister, who shrugged, a half apology in her eyes. I have an audition next week, I said quietly, voice swallowed by the clatter. Another one, my aunt scoffed. You never get in, Lucia. The city's full of hungry kids who want that spot. You're better off here, settle down. Why embarrass yourself and all of us? Silence except for the scraping of cutlery. The words weighed in the room, thick and unspoken. Failures, disappointments, their embarrassing daughter. I finished my plate quickly, my appetite gone. My bedroom overlooked the bakery alley, full of trash, noise, and the stray dogs that circled at dusk. I lay in bed and stared at the cracked ceiling, bow hand aching, replaying every mistake from rehearsal. I knew the critique was right. I wasn't ready. My playing was a shadow of what I wanted it to be. Something in my hands always froze at the wrong moments. Still, long after everyone's voices had faded, I practiced muted scales in the dark, resolve settling in like the city's midnight smog. The thing they all missed, no one wanted this more than I did. Despite my failures and their scorn, I auditioned again, and again. Every time I walked into those grand old halls, spines of columns holding up the stained glass, managers and board musicians sized me up. All those faces tight-lipped, ready to dismiss. When I played, sometimes my nerves got the better of me, the sour notes haunted my dreams. I played for children's concerts, weddings, hotel lobbies. The jobs were scarce, and most of the money went to the men. Sometimes I handed over all my pay for rent and counted tortillas to see if I'd make it to next week. My father refused to speak of my music. My mother, worried but obedient, slipped coins into my pocket, her eyes sad and proud at once. My cousins offered worthless advice: just teach kids, Lucia, or marry already and put that violin down. There were days I wanted to quit, when the blisters on my fingers burst, when my stomach gnawed at itself, when every friend but my childhood neighbor disappeared. My last rehearsal with Don Ignacio, he'd looked at me like I was already invisible. Silence became my companion, long bus rides with my violin across my knees, gazing out at the valley spilling red and gold beneath the sinking sun. I learned to find comfort there, in the spaces between notes, the places where I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. The resolve came not from applause, but from the way the music felt when it was just for me. No critics. No glances, just Schubert in the shadows or Bach in the rising light. My breakthrough, if you could call it that, came on a sweltering night at the edge of the old city. I was playing at an open-air café by the Plaza Garibaldi. The heat pressed down, thick with cigarette smoke and cheap tequila. Most people didn't care for classical music here. They came for mariachi or raucous banda, not a lone woman playing sonatas under flickering bulbs. But it was what I had, a gig, a place to be heard. Halfway through my set, a slim man in a linen suit sat at a table in the shadow and watched me. He didn't clap, didn't drink. When I finished packing up to go, he approached and handed me a card. "My name is Alejandro Vasquez," he said quietly. "I direct the Orchestra Juvenile." He had the careful, measured bearing of a musician who'd grown up poor and climbed all the way up, an outsider who'd found the keys to the gates. "I don't play that well," I said, embarrassed, but he shook his head. "I listened to your batch. You need polish, yes, but you have the hunger. They cannot teach that. Auditions are next Saturday in Coyoacan. Bring your violin." He leaned in, voice lower. "Forget the critics. They hate what they can't make themselves." That night, riding home as the city lights blurred through the cracked window, I pressed his card tight in my fist. For a week I barely slept. I practiced until my hands cramped. The violin seemed to weep and burn under my fingers. Old scales, endless arpeggios, practice with a metronome ticking away all my doubt. My tears, bread cooled on the counter in fat loaves I could barely afford to eat. The city felt distant and cold and full of shadows. Audition day, I arrived trembling. The hall was reverent, high-arched, full of late afternoon dust falling in columns of gold. Alejandro didn't smile, merely nodded as I played. I lost myself in the adagio, for once playing not for fear but for love, for every silent night in my room, for everything the others had stolen from me with their scorn. When I finished, the judges were silent. My heart pounded. The silence stretched. Something in Alejandro's gaze softened. He nodded. "We'll be in touch," he said, but the look in his eyes, the kind musicians give each other, wordless and real, told me what I needed. Within a week, I was in rehearsals with the Orchestra Juvenile. It was work, hard, back-breaking, sometimes humiliating work. Senior players sneered, but Alejandro stood by me. He drilled me with the patience of a man who understood being battered by life. With every concert, my hands grew stronger, my ear keener. The sound of my violin was no longer desperate. It rang clear, bright, confident. We played the Palacio de Bellas Arts, the plaza in Santa Maria, then started touring. I sent tickets home, but my father glared at the envelopes unread. My tear kept every review in a shoebox, proud, wordless. People stopped mocking, sometimes even my own family nodded, grudging with approval they'd never given before. "Aye, Lucia, look at her on television." They clapped me on the back like winning a lottery was an inevitability. But I remembered that day in the studio, the sneers, the way my dreams had sounded like a joke, even to those I loved. 6 years later, I was 28, older than most but finally steady. My violin case, battered and covered in stickers from half a dozen countries, was my talisman. Alejandro, now a dear friend, had arranged a solo concerto in the grandest old theater in Mexico City, the Teatro de Gallardo, a homecoming of sorts. When the roster was published, my name at the top, my aunts and cousins called. "We are coming, Lucia." Even Don Ignacio was coaxed out of retirement to attend, but my father did not call. He would not buy a ticket, he said. Alone in my dressing room, the silence before curtain, I tried not to dwell on it, but the old ache was there, low and present. Still, I tuned the violin, straightened my skirt, breathed. Tonight the theatre was packed, crystal chandeliers glittered, red velvet seats shimmering under the lights, and a forest of faces rose tier after tier. I could feel the city itself thrum below us, buses and cars still rushing outside, carrying the noise of millions down avenidas wide as rivers. Backstage, Alejandro took my shoulder. "You have earned every bit of this, play for yourself first," he smiled. "Let them marvel." As the curtain rose, I stepped forward, blinded by the white spill of the lights. The air was so thick I could taste it, perfume and anticipation. I found my spot, planted both feet. Silence fell, 1,000 people holding their breath. From the wings, I saw them. My family, my tia with her silver hair, all clean and pressed in their best clothes. My mother, white-knuckled on the armrest. Even Don Ignacio, small and severe as ever, arms crossed, eyes sharp. I lifted the violin and waited for the orchestra's swell. The first note soared into the space, a phrase I'd played 1,000 times but never like this. Every ounce of pain, of bitterness, of resolve was there in the sound. The music poured out, not desperate but triumphant, golden and bright, high over the doubts and the scorn. Halfway through, my eyes flickered to the audience. I caught Mariana, Raoul, some faces from the old studio seated with my old professors. Their mouths were slack, dead quiet, looking at me with something dangerously close to awe or perhaps envy. Don Ignacio's jaw was set tight, but his eyes, perhaps for the first time, softened. My fingers flew across the strings in the cadenza, the same passage they'd all mocked, sure and unapologetic this time. My final note hung in the hall, ringing out, and then the thunder of applause, not polite but wild, rolling from ceiling to marble floor, drowning out every snicker, every cruel whisper from years before. The curtain call, flowers, the orchestra standing, Alejandro's proud, tearful smile. As I bowed, I found my family in the second row. My father was standing with the others, unmoving, pride and something like shock flickering on his face. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. After the show, in the grand marble foyer under the crystal chandeliers, dozens pressed forward, old neighbors, my professors hiding surprise behind their congratulations, Mariana almost spitting with jealousy. Don Ignacio came last. He cleared his throat. "That was unexpected," he managed. For once his eyes held no scorn, just the smallest hint of respect. "Gracias, maestro," I said. The words felt light, not bitter. When he left, Raoul and Mariana trailed after him, unable to meet my gaze. My mother threw her arms around me, crying openly. "Mijita, I'm so proud." My tia handed me a rose, face radiant. My father stood uncertain at the edge of the crowd. He came to me, awkward, gruff, holding both his cap and his pride in his hands. "I didn't know you could do that," he said. After a beat, he added, "You proved us wrong." "I'm sorry I doubted." For all the standing ovations, that admission was the thing I had craved. It cracked open the silence between us, the hard shell I had learned to wear in every room. Later that night, I walked alone through the quieting streets. Overhead, the stars blinked through the haze. I passed by the old studio, the windows dark, a cleaning woman sweeping the threshold. I pressed my fingers to the glass for a moment, remembered the girl standing trembling before a room full of laughter. The pain faded, replaced by something warmer. I had made it home. The city had not changed. Still busy, still stubborn, still blaring its awful, beautiful music day and night, but I had changed. The silence that once pressed me down was now mine. It filled me with resolve and grace. My dream, ridiculous and battered, was real. I had given it shape, and now, when I played, it was no longer just for me. It was for every girl with shaking hands in every bright, unkind room. And for every quiet return where finally, at last, the music was enough.